Okay, this is the Higgins Black Magic brush tip ink marker. It's something I've really been wanting to get for a long time. Now, I have been using for a number of years the Pentel brush pen, and I really like it. It makes wonderful marks, and it's a wonderful travel companion, and I use it to sketch in the studio as well. But I can only use Higgins or some sort of ink that isn't shellacked base. It has to always be water soluble, and that's the problem with this, is that if you want to make a drawing and then say do watercolors over it, then well, you can't if you're using this brush pen, the Pentel, because everything will break down. Okay, well, feels pretty nice. Let's see. Now, as you can see, it comes with a white nib, and I believe on the instructions it tells you to take the cap, and there's a hole right here, and you put the bristles through there, and then you pump the pen repeatedly to get, look at that, it just pumps the ink right down into the bristles. Okay, now the cap fits on the back end, and let's see what kind of marks this thing makes. Comes to a pretty sharp point. Just making all sorts of random hatches and marks. I want to try it up against the Pentel marker, or the Pentel brush. Okay, so that's the Pentel. I think there's a ball bearing or something in here that you need to shake up, get the ink really mixed up, because this is pigmented ink, and you'll want to get that really mixed up really well in there. They seem to work about the same. I will tell you, this is really big, it's really fat in your hand, and so I'm going to have to get used to it. I do like the Pentel a little bit better as far as how it feels in the hand. You can tell that this is probably 50% bigger around than the Pentel, the Higgins is. And if you're used to working with markers, you may like it better. I'm used to working more with pencils and pens, so I'm finding that the Pentel marker or brush pen is a little more, I'm more used to it in my hand, so I like it actually a little bit better. But this is the first time I've ever used it, so the Higgins Black Magic, so I will, I'm sure I'll get used to it. It's just, a lot of it is whatever you get used to. But overall, seems pretty good. The ink seems a little bit more watery. It seems to get a little bit looser, fuzzier edges than the Eternal ink, but this is cheap copy paper, so I'm not going to judge it one way or another with that. But it is real responsive. You can do really fat lines, really skinny lines. So I like that. I don't particularly care for the way the cap goes on the back. It's real, it doesn't want to stay on. You can see you can't push it on very far. That I don't care for. And it doesn't screw on. It just pops on. That I don't care for. If you put this on and you're out of the studio, I guarantee you'll lose it. So I would not encourage you to put the cap on the back end. I would say put it in your pocket. So I don't care for that. Although I will tell you one thing that I've done with a lot of my water brushes, because I bought a water brush and I lost the cap to it, so that kind of rendered it useless. I'm probably going to put a piece of tape and a string on this and attach it so that I can not worry about losing the cap. As a matter of fact, yes, I can show you. I've actually done that with all of my water brushes. All I did was take a piece of tape and tape just cheap string to the back end of the brush onto the cap, and there you go. It's not particularly pretty, it's not particularly elegant, but it gets the job done. Like I said, I bought one of these, probably paid about 15 bucks for it, and the first time I took it out, the cap fell off. So I learned my lesson, and so every single one of these, in some way or another, I've got the cap attached permanently, as it were. That's what I would do with this, because I'm positive that this will get lost. Now, I'm looking on the... Oh, one thing I will say that I do like about the cap for this Blackmagic marker, I keep calling it a marker, it's a brush pen, they call it a brush marker, is the hole where the brush goes in. It's really quite large, quite generous, and that's really important because you don't want to be sticking this in and breaking all the bristles off, so or bending them in any way. So I like the fact that they've done that. Now it says on the instructions, shake well before activating pump to prime. So yeah, shake it up real well. I didn't shake it before I primed it, but still worked fine. And ink may have been a little bit watery on me at the beginning because I didn't shake it. So, I want to be fair with this thing. Then they've got it in French, I guess. So they don't tell you how to put ink in this thing. It says dilutable with water or dilutable with water plus refillable, removable tip. So they're not telling you, and that's always frustrating. So many of these companies, they have these things and they don't tell you how to do stuff. They want you to just, I guess, figure it out yourself. I'm assuming because the back end, the back end, there's no way that's all solid one piece. This doesn't screw out or come out in any manner, pop out. The only way to access the inside of this is to actually pull the brush out, and then of course you're going to get ink on your fingers. That's apparently a given. That's going to happen. But get you some sort of a syringe like this, put it in your Blackmagic inkwell, put it in this, draw some out. That's what I'll do. And then this will fit right down in there, and I'm assuming you would just squeeze the plunger and put your ink in that way. So Yep, and then that pops back in with no problem. Yeah, the ink does feather out a lot more than it does with the Eterna ink. I can see feathered edges a lot more with it. But it may be, again, that this Black Magic just in general doesn't work as well on cheap paper like that. All right, let's put these two to a side-by-side test. So on the one side, I've got the Pentel. I'm going to make a mark and do a little bit of hatching. Then I'll do the same thing. Probably a good idea to shake it up every time you use it. Now this does not give you as thin a line, at least at the beginning. One of the things you're going to want to do if you use this is make a mark somewhere not on your paper and get some of the ink off of the tip, because the tip does seem to fill up with ink and really bulge out, so it's quite a bit thicker with your initial mark, whereas with the Pentel I was able to immediately make this really thin needle sharp mark and then put some pressure and make it thicker and go back and forth, whereas with this Black Magic marker, couldn't do it. The first mark I made, you know, even now, it's really kind of thick, so it's certainly not as thin and precise as the marks you're going to get from a Pentel marker. Pentel Brush Pen. I keep calling these things markers, and they're really not. They're brush pens. So there's no question that the Higgins Black Magic Brush Marker makes a much thicker line just overall. It's a little more challenging to get really thin, super small marks like you can with the Pentel brush pen. So you can to a certain extent, but not nearly like you can with the Pentel marker. And I'm not saying either one's better or worse, it's just you need to know what you're getting and what each one is capable of doing. And this paper is Strathmore toned gray paper. I really like it. I use it a lot for my illustration work, for sketching. I just really like it. So I had a scrap and I wanted to see how it was going to work doing this. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I'm just taking a Chinese calligraphy brush that's wet, and you can see that when water comes in contact with it, you know, it starts breaking down and smudging. Although, interestingly enough, not as much as it does on some paper. So this Strathmore toned paper actually holds the ink, even something like Eternal ink, pretty well without having as bad a smudging as you'd like. But definitely, if you're going to do washes over something like Eterna ink, just understand it is going to break down and it is going to begin infecting, if you will, the colors that you put down. And so if you got like yellows, then it'll turn green, because black and yellow actually make green. Alright, here with the Higgins. Oh wow, look at that. I'm actually kind of scrubbing it, and I'm not getting any smudging or loosening of the ink on the paper at all. So it's acting like just like normal Blackmagic ink. Now, it's a little difficult to see because, of course, the paper's wet. So let's hit it with a blow dryer again. Okay, as you can see, the lines from the Pentel Brush Pen, they've really diffused, they've faded, they've bled over into the rest of the paper. I don't really see any of the lines blurring or smudging at all here. It looks just as pretty much as sharp and crisp as when I originally put it down. Now, of course, you can see this sort of ghosting, this darkening of the paper around here. And honestly, I'm not sure if there's a little bit of ink left over from here that sort of insinuated itself into the paper. I'm not sure if that's just the water itself sort of staining the paper and causing a slight amount of discoloration, but overall, this is fantastic. I would trust any ink drawing I did with this Higgins Blackmagic with a wash on top of it without any fear that it was going to bleed, fuzz, fade, do anything. And let's try something else since I do this with watercolors. Again, we'll take the Pentel, do a little bit of mark, shake it up, make sure we get the pigments mixed up in there, and let's see. I am beginning to get a bit thinner lines here than I had before. So maybe it just needs a little bit of usage. This does have stiffer bristles than the Pentel marker does, or Pentel brush does. Actually, markedly thicker, more stiff. Not necessarily good or bad. It's just that's the way it is. So you get a little more bounce, a little more flex with the Pentel, and you can actually hear the Higgins brush scratching the surface. So again, just a little bit different, and it is thicker. You're not going to get as thin as you were again with the Pentel. And so I don't pollute the Higgins with the Pentel. I'm going to do the Higgins first. You can see I'm really kind of scrubbing around and I'm not getting any change in color at all. It's just sitting there minding its own business. Yeah, but look at that. Look how very quickly that gets dirty and begins to fade and get lost. And to be fair, it's not picking up as much color. It's not as bad as I would have fear with that it could, but nonetheless, it is breaking down the marks quite a bit. It's causing them to bleed out and fade. And that's the biggest issue, more than anything else, at least on this paper, is that if you've put down these marks and you really want them to stay, you really want to keep and preserve the integrity of your drawing, then the Pentel brush is not what you're going to want to use, because as soon as you start using any aqueous medium, it's going to bleed and it's going to fade, whereas using the Higgins Brush Marker pen, it's not going to. So I like them both. I actually recommend owning both. I would not want to be without either, because I really like a little more the way the Pentel handles. It handles more like a regular pen. This acts more like a marker, and it's so much bigger. I'm going to have to get used to being able to hold it in my hand and manipulate it with the fine motor skills that you can get with something that's a little more thin like this Pentel. But either one are both great. I love them both. I highly recommend getting both of them. If you've enjoyed this episode, think about subscribing. You can also check out my podcast at thearthropologist.podbean.com.